Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 27th, 2021 Community Formation Commission meeting. We will call this meeting to order at 5:32 p.m. Sam, if we could do roll call.
Yes, give me 1 second. Commissioner Adam Malikan. Commissioner Alonso.
Here.
Commissioner Chavez.
Here.
Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Commissioner Kim Johnson. Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Killebrew.
Yeah.
Commissioner O'Gorman.
Here.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Here.
Commissioner Sander.
Here.
Commissioner Wood.
Here.
Vice Chair Zepeda.
Here.
And Commissioner Reynaud. Didn't hear him, but I know that he's online. I can see him.
All right. Thank you, Sam. And now we will move on to public comment for items that are not related to anything on our agenda for today. Sam, do we have anyone that wants to give public comment?
Give me 1 second to find out. There are no attendees, so no public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. So we'll move on to our administrative agenda, and we will start with announcements. And happy to announce that this is our last meeting on GoToWebinar, and we'll be moving to Zoom for our future meetings. So really exciting. I think those are the announcements for now. We'll move on to item B of the administrative agenda, and that's consideration and action on the draft Community Formation Commission meeting minutes for October 13th, 2021. Does anyone have any edits to the meeting minutes for October 13th? And I'm seeing none. So do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A motion from Christian. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Jordan. Any discussion? Not seeing any. Sam, can we do a roll call vote, please?
Sure, let me just open it public comment. If there is anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 4A and B administrative agenda, please raise your hand. There are none, so I will begin with the roll call vote. Commissioner Adam Malikan. Commissioner Alonso.
Aye.
Commissioner Wood.
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez.
Aye.
Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson. Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Killebrew.
Hey. Aye.
Commissioner O'Gorman.
Present.
Just want to confirm it's for the minutes. So I'm assuming that's an aye.
Yes.
I apologize. Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Reynaud. Commissioner Reynaud, can you indicate if you're supportive of the administrative agenda?
Louis, it seems like your audio might not be working.
Correct. So we'll move on to Commissioner Sander. Commissioner Reynaud has indicated a thumbs up. Commissioner Sander.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Zepeda.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Sam. And so now we'll move on to item 5, which is going to be working group updates. The commission will receive updates from the working groups on their progress. The commission may provide direction on the working groups based on the information presented. We will reserve the drafting work group for the next item, but the other work groups can give updates now. Does anyone want to start?
Give me 1 second so I can give Commissioner Alonso screen sharing if you'd like at this point.
It's going to be the next item, Sam, for the drafting work group.
Oh,
This
got
will be the survey and then the marketing and outreach work group.
I can go quickly for a survey because it's a quick update. We technically had 2 meetings, but we were not able to get the full working group together at either of them. So we haven't done that much. We're definitely interested to hear, hopefully, an update at some point about CCI and when we can start working with them. And at this point, we basically just have sort of preliminary drafted questions and demographic sections and things like that that we're ready to run by them when we have the chance, and also present to the commission when we can do so, probably at the next one, I'm hoping, to present those questions for discussion.
And Sam, correct to say that the contract should be finalized soon, right?
Correct, Chair. We just sent the proposed final contract to them for review and for signature.
Perfect.
Great, thank you.
So that's good news. Let's see. I believe Vice Chair Cepeda, did you want to start the update for the the education and outreach group?
Yes, thank you. So we're still working on the edits for the video and for the first video that's going to be coming out, like for the promotions. And so as soon as we're completed with that, we'll be able to share that with the rest of the group. And so right now we're just working on that to be able to work in collaborations with the other groups to start doing more outreach. So, and then it's very short update. So if my group would like to add anything else to that? No, yeah.
I can.
Okay.
In addition, we're also going to be working with Cami to develop a facilitator guide to help facilitate the meetings for the community cafes, which we would like to discuss further, and dates and times. And one thing that we propose our group is responsible for is looking for dates, times, and places for those community cafes to happen, and to provide a facilitator guide for facilitators during that process. So that's kind of another piece of where we are. I'm trying to remember if there were other things that we were supposed to do.
Yeah, I was going to make a suggestion and gauge the group's feedback on, we have a quick turnaround if we want to do some outreach events in November, and our next couple of meetings are going to be important. We're going to be drafting between now and the next meeting. I was wondering if the commission felt comfortable giving the education and outreach group the responsibility, like Louisa said, of finding the locations, times, and days for the community cafes in November. And we were going to propose the week of November 15th for those to take place after our next meeting. And then giving the responsibility of shaping what the community cafes will look like to the survey group, since they're going to be working with CCI. And CCI has the experience of doing those community cafes in the past. But wanted to get the feedback of the commission to see if that's acceptable, and if so, I think it would make for a really productive period between now and our next meeting.
Yeah, that was going to be a follow-up question on that, just because I thought the community cafes were actually part of our working group. So because CCI said they were going to be the ones facilitating that for the qualitative analysis, not to say it can't be y'all's, but I guess we should figure that out, because I don't think we can, if we work together, that's going to be too many people on a working group like that. But
that was the intention, is to just, our education piece would be just a guide for the facilitators, whomever they might.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Not us, but to have a guide that's written out with the assistance with Cami and NACOL and things that have been already created for other cities in the past. based on what decisions will be made in the next meeting, this meeting and the next meeting.
Okay, because I also thought the community cafes were, I mean, we were going to have a model to present at them, right? So are we saying that we are ready to have that in a couple weeks? Right, because
Well,
the community cafes were like in all, like the survey, or my understanding of it was, we would have the model to present and there would be a survey to go with it. The community cafe was a model where we could show that video or present the model in person, but still do the survey as well.
That's the hope.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
That is the hope.
Mary?
Yeah, I guess that was kind of one of my questions, just how the roles interface. And it was my understanding that the group you're contracting with, Survey Group, was going to be sort of facilitating this. So I'm just timing wise, just wondering how that's going to work. And then, I mean, I'm fine with delegating. I think the important thing is just that we're kept informed. And also, since the community outreach, that Excel table or whatever it is, you know, has some of the primary groups, if that's enough, or would you, Louis, Survey Group, or the other group, you know, want me to bunch those in certain types? I guess just, again, trying to integrate the different committees that have formed.
I think that document's going to be really helpful to determining who we're going to be reaching out to. In terms of number of community cafes, we're going to be somewhat limited. We're not going to be able to have one for every stakeholder, but we're hoping to give an update at the next meeting with our progress on finding location, dates, and times. And then the survey work group would be working with CCI to determine what the community cafes would actually look like. And as far as facilitators, I know that the survey group has some contact for facilitators, but then Cami also has some professionals that work in oversight that could possibly facilitate, that do oversight work in California. So just trying to figure all of that out and then providing an update at the next meeting. Thoughts or feedback?
I'm just wondering, we had talked at one point about kind of having more of a forum that we would all be at, and even if it's virtually, so any of and then notifying all these different kinds of groups, so we're not leaving anyone out, business groups, neighborhood councils, whatever, and then just hearing from them. So I don't know how that would fit in or when. I mean, obviously we have to be clear on our model, you know, first.
I believe in the original timeline, we had scheduled a actual meeting, a community formation commission meeting, which would be like, here's a big, just us explaining it so that all of us are there. We would have to look in to see which meeting that could be. But I think that would be a good opportunity since we already have this existing meeting. It's already open to the public. It'll be on Zoom, so it'll be more accessible. So I think if we can build that into the schedule or shift that, I think that would be beneficial.
And just do a really big PR thing, you know, press release.
I'm wondering if that violates Brown Act, because we can't all be at a meeting unless it's considered an official commission meeting. So it would have to be less than majority.
It would be an official meeting.
With an agenda, and I think we just need a little more guidance on what that would look like and how we would be able to get public response and have conversation around a specific topic if that's not on the agenda. So I think it's important, but I also think that we just need a little bit more guidance so that we're staying within Brown Act.
Well, that would be the item on the agenda. I mean, I've done it many times, or the Board of Supervisors has, like, we're just going to do a budget workshop. Here's the budget. Tell us what you think. As long as that's clear on the agenda and we have the materials out there in, you know, in time. It's just another meeting, but so anyways.
Any other feedback? Cami, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I just wanted to add that for the community cafes, I think having all of the recommendations and every bit of information about the model is not going to be necessary, because it's going to be a lot of listening, some talking and framing, but it is really your opportunity to hear from different community groups that about what they think about what you have already. And it also allows them to do it in a forum where they are with people from their own group, which often will make people feel very comfortable about speaking freely and being able to tell you exactly what's on their mind regarding that framework. And so I think that there's definitely a place for both of the types of events that you're talking about, the community cafes and a larger event. And I think the larger event is definitely one where you have more information, and it can be a much larger or time-intensive educational session. But I think the community cafes are an amazing opportunity to listen and hear, and then also do it in a way where you can have them, I mean, you can have them over a couple of days, you can have them simultaneously, and the facilitator guide that Louisa was talking about will allow you to collect and ask the same questions, make sure you've got apples and apples coming out of the meeting, so that then CCI is able to take some of that information that comes out of there and really analyze it for you to tell you what you can gather from that input that you were able to get. I'm really excited about them, and I'm hoping that I can be there for them during that time and actually be near any of you at any given time while we're in this process.
Good.
Thank you for that, Cami. Any other feedback? Does that sound okay with everyone? Delegating those tasks and then coming back next meeting with updates?
Yeah.
Perfect. Sounds great. I think that's it for working group updates. Sam, can we open up public comment?
Sure, Chair. Give me 1 second. If there's anybody in the public that would like to speak on item 5, working group updates, please raise your hand in the app feature. There are no hands raised, so this item can be closed.
Sounds great, Sam. So we'll close this item and we'll move on to the next item, which is the drafting work group discussion. The Community Formation Commission will discuss the progress on the first draft of the purpose statement for the review board portion of the oversight model. And after discussion and amendments, the CFC may take action in improving part or all of the text. I will give it over to Christian, I believe.
Yes. Sam, can you give me the ability to share? Oh, sweet. Okay.
Sure. I just made you a presenter, so see if that works.
A lot of power.
It looks like I have the ability, but I have to give me 1 second here. So it's asking to record the contents of my screen, and I have to give permission for my computer to do that, which is going to require me to close out really quick. So I will be momentarily out and right back.
Would it help, Christian? I have it as well. I can bring it up if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful, Cami. Unfortunately, because I'm on a Mac, I don't have like ActiveX controls for the like in presentation note taking.
Okay.
If you're able to add that to the PowerPoint really quick, that would be great. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then no worries. We would just have to like go into the editing mode and collaborate together on the screen, if that makes sense.
Okay. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I just have to, it's one of those things where I have to figure out how to do it.
Do you want to take a 5-minute break, Chair?
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. So we'll take a 5-minute, 5-minute recess. We'll come back at like 5:57.
Christian, is that enough time for you?
Yeah, that's more than enough.
Okay.
So on the PowerPoint presentation, we basically just need like an ActiveX text box. So in the like control console, you should have the ability, Cami, in PowerPoint to select developer.
Yeah, I'm there. And then the text box.
Yep. And if you could just add that to both slides 5 and 6, that's all that needs to get done.
Okay. Hopefully I'm doing this right. Christian, do you remember what I need to click in the properties?
That's a good question. Because on the properties, we want to make sure that we can do be able to enter, right? Because otherwise, it's just like a long string of text where you can't really like bullet it out.
Right.
So
let me just do a quick Google here.
Go ahead.
We will call this meeting back to order at 5:58, and we will turn it over to Christian to present the drafting subcommittee's work on the purpose for the review board.
thank you. And thank you, Cami, and everyone for holding tight with the technical stuff. So we go to the next slide, Cami, if you wouldn't mind. Serafina is going to really quick summarize the work of the drafting subcommittee, and then we'll jump into a interactive brainstorming session with the purpose statement draft.
Yeah, so we've met twice since our last meeting, and we basically just looked at a few other examples from Berkeley and Madison, Wisconsin, and then we looked at what we had written down from our initial brainstorm where we were writing out our ideas for the purpose. We did cut some things out and save them for later, so when you look at the next document, you'll see that some things might be missing, but we still have those. We felt as a group that they didn't fit well with the purpose and were better fit elsewhere. But yeah, so we then summarized the main points from that brainstorm and we put them into both a bulleted list and also a paragraph format, which we'll talk about a little bit more once we head to the next slides. But yeah, tonight we're just gonna get some more feedback from everyone because what we had originally brainstormed was not as much as we're hoping to get. So yeah.
Thanks, Serafina. Yeah, if we go to the next slide. So basically, like just to illustrate, like when we reviewed the other city ordinances, they either had one of two different styles for how to present the purpose right at the beginning, right, of the ordinance. And so really came down to two different options. You can either list them out, as you can see in this example here, where it's like the purpose of the oversight entity is to A, B, C, and D, and list out like the different purposes. or some of them were very brief, very succinct and summarized with one paragraph. And you can see on the second example here where they just summarize it as the purpose is to X, Y, and Z in one single paragraph or 2 paragraphs at the most. So we have a couple of options here on form. Definitely want to focus more on substance, but just putting that out there that our subcommittee saw the merits in both, which is why we're presenting both tonight. So it's a bit confusing that we have 2, and I understand that, but we wanted to make sure that you can see visually like what they would look like and get to a consensus on which form we like, and then work on the substance. And so we could go to the next slide. We were pulling for the substance from our brainstorm. So if you remember, we did at the very beginning, before we started talking about authorities and duties and training and all of that kind of stuff, we talked about purpose. This is what we came up with together. These are all the points right here. You can find them in the CFC working document that Cami sent all of us. So these are just copied and pasted directly from there. This is where we pulled for the substance of our purpose statement. So you can see here that some of these things are like overlapping or repetitive. So we worked our best to kind of consolidate some of the ones that were repetitive or overlapping. And then you'll also notice that some of these things are stuff that we talked about in the session in other sessions, right? Where we talked about authorities and powers and duties and training. And so it's not that these things won't make it into the wording, it's that we felt that they had a better place elsewhere, right? As opposed to the purpose, which is more of a purpose statement, like a lofty statement, like outlining the goal of the Civilian Oversight Commission or entity. And so that's kind of was our process on how we worked through it. And now if we could go to the first example that we came up with. And again, this is just a draft. So what we're discussing tonight is the draft, and we're looking for your feedback and any feedback from, maybe community members that are participating and looking on this purpose section. So I'll just read it and then maybe we'd start the discussion. So what we came up with was, in an effort to promote and build trust, transparency, and accountability, the oversight entity will provide opportunities for community input on the policies, practices, and procedures, and ensure the independent investigation of misconduct allegations against the Santa Barbara Police Department through civilian oversight. So that is the paragraph example. And then if we could maybe go to the next one. This is the list example that we came up with. So as you can see here, again, just a draft. The purpose of the oversight entity is to A, build trust and strengthen relations between law enforcement and the community it serves. B, ensure the investigation of allegations of excessive force or those related to discrimination. C, increased communication between the public, the Santa Barbara Police Department, and the Independent Oversight Commission. And D, provide opportunities for community input on the policies, practices, and procedures of the Santa Barbara Police Department. So you can see kind of in the differences between them and how, like, if you are gonna like bullet list out things, you can give more detail on some of these. Obviously, we need to talk about the substance of them, and that's what I wanted to start the discussion with, and start with the paragraph example. So go ahead. Yeah, whoever wants to start.
I'd just like to say, as a member of the committee, we had one meeting that was about 90 minutes and kind of had written something out. And then there was a meeting yesterday, I think only 2 people could go. So there's some changes here that we hadn't seen. And I guess specifically, I want to mention the item on ensuring the independent investigation of misconduct allegations, which I think is a little different on the bullet point one. That was not something in the original purpose, and I think we had talked about it being in the authorities. So I think it's important because we really haven't talked about specifically, and I think that's what we're probably maybe going to do later tonight, what the investigative part will be, since this is a review board. So it's just important for me to say that because I was surprised to see it on there.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's actually a perfect way to start this out, is like if there is anything on either of these like that doesn't sit well with you, that you're surprised to see there, that you think is missing and you want to include there, like this is the time to, you know, just like shout it out. Like we want to hear it. Because again, this was done, like what is here was done, I feel like a pretty long time ago, when I feel like I didn't know as much or I wasn't quite sure, you know, what exactly the purpose would be. But yeah, I think that's a great point, Mary. Like, again, anything that you want to share. let's
Well, that's why I wanted to, since I was on the committee.
Yeah.
And if you can go to the one that has the bullet points or numbers, because it's a little easier to delineate those.
This one, Mary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So, and again, B is a little different than it was in the first one. It includes those related to discrimination. So again, that was something, I mean, I don't think should be in the purpose section, but if you look at the other items, really what we saw in some of the examples, and I think the reason that, if I recall, that the commission wanted this committee, and Cami, you can add or subtract or whatever, but was the idea that if we start with a purpose, then the other things that we come up with, whether it's the authorities or duties or whatever, you know, we can go back to the purpose to see, does this fit under there? Does this help promote our purpose? So in that sense, you know, being a little general, I mean, some are more fluffy than this, but.
So I have a general question, not detailed to the context of this, but I'm just kind of curious because I know it's hard to do twice a month meetings, and then the subcommittee, and I just have to give some respect to Rachel because she's been trying to corral our subcommittee group, and so I understand missing subcommittee meetings and how that impacts, you know, your assignment, if you would say. So I'm just curious if the whole committee was able to review this document before presenting it to us tonight, and then if this is the only discrepancy, because it's because I'm already getting a little, like, I'm trying to keep track, and if it continues like this, I'm wondering if it would just be better time management to maybe wait. So I'm just curious if the whole committee saw this presentation and feels comfortable presenting it tonight.
Not until it was done.
Yeah,
well,
so
it's a draft. So there's nothing that's been like decided. What we're trying to do is have a conversation about like the purpose section, right? What should be in the purpose section. We produced 2 examples in form and drawn from substance of what this group came together to that said should be in the purpose section. So we could go back to slide 4. So again, this is what we all came up with together, right? So the specific language about, you know, investigation of allegations and of excessive force and those related to discrimination came directly from the brainstorm that this group did together, like the entire commission or whoever was present at that meeting. So we wanted to bring parts of that in. Obviously, like there were some of these that we felt were better fitting elsewhere. And in the conversation that we had in the meeting yesterday, was that the investigation part of it was missing from the purpose. So that we added that back in based on feedback from other members of the group that didn't make it to the first meeting. Mary, you obviously were not able to make it to the meeting yesterday. I did follow up with meeting minutes that like noted the changes, and you were notified 24 hours before the meeting. So,
you know what? I said what I said, and again, Cami, if you can. When we talked about what our purpose was, we acknowledged that when we did the brainstorm several weeks ago, it literally was just that, a brainstorm. We were just throwing things out there. So the purpose of our committee, so to speak, you know, was to really pick through those and see, you know, what fits purpose, what doesn't, because, you know, it's not like we all voted on these or anything like that. So anyways.
And if I can make a suggestion.
To my question, because I know the survey group, we planned on presenting, and then a member of our committee wasn't fully comfortable with doing that yet. So then we held off, and then we presented a little bit, I think just the next meeting or something. So my question was, I understand the process, Christian, but I guess my question is to the whole subcommittee group. Do you feel comfortable presenting your presentation tonight?
Yes.
I personally do as well, because again, like, it's just a draft. Like, it's totally fine. We're gonna make probably a lot more changes after this. So again, like, this is just to help get us started. Yeah, that's all it is. And it's not the final draft at all. I would be scared if it was. So yeah,
Anna is also on the subcommittee. Would you like to weigh in on whether we should move forward with presenting? Demo is not here tonight.
Yeah, I would definitely move forward with presenting. It's like everybody's mentioning, and I wasn't there this last meeting, but like how they're both mentioning, it's information that we have all brainstormed and we have all seen. It was just put together very in an organized manner on here, so we're able to see it. And again, it's the first one, you know, so we can. I'm more than comfortable to move forward and continue.
Okay, great.
If I can make a suggestion, or just even throw this out there, is this, like Christian mentioned, these are the items that we discussed in the brainstorming session. But even on this list, like, I can see some stuff now looking at it that I want to throw in there. And I think let's talk about what we want to see in the purpose statement, and try to come to a consensus on those things, so that the drafting group has a much better idea on where to focus the purpose, so that the next time we see it, it's going to be much easier. We're going to be talking more about which words to use rather than what to include in it. So I think this could be a really valuable opportunity for us to give some of that input that Mary was talking about, because I too had a concern about that investigation clause. And I think when we're talking about investigations, that's a really hot button portion of our recommendation. So we need to be really intentional about how we frame it in the text of what we're drafting.
Can I ask a quick question just about this slide? So is this slide everything that we initially brainstormed with Cami when she was taking notes on that? Okay. And that full document was shared, right? I've been trying to find that in my email to like have it up alongside, but I can't remember who shared it or when.
I shared it, and it's called the Santa Barbara CFC working document.
Cool. Okay, that'll help me search my email. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think like going forward as well, like we want to avoid too much like wordsmithing while we're here, because it's like a less productive use of our time. And so what we did our best to summarize it. So what you have are two summaries, right? Two summaries of this information in the format that we've seen from other ordinances. So where we want to focus this discussion is on what is missing from the summary drafts that we need to add. I mean, hopefully we get to the best form we can on the first try. I don't think that's realistic, but that's what this presentation is for, right? Is to gather your feedback and to come back with more input and consensus on the actual wording. So that's kind of how the process will go. I imagine that's how it will go going forward with the other sections as well. But keep in mind, like, this is the purpose statement. And while extremely important, it is one of the least meaty parts of the of the ordinance. So I think that like you just keep that in mind going forward. Is like the drafting subcommittee will look at the section, do our best to summarize, and then get feedback from you to get to a better version.
Okay, so let's go back to the investigation part, because we have not, as a group, discussed. We're talking about a review body, not an investigative body. So I think that's what we're going to do under Cami. Is it authorities or when we do the auditor monitor discussion?
Yes, and I think that just to go back to the original working document, I think well, first of all, I think Gabe is absolutely right that you will need to be really intentional about how you use that word, because it is a hot button word. But I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you did the brainstorming, this was more about not doing the investigation, but making sure that all misconduct allegations were investigated by whether that was the police department, or you had that if needed independently clause. But I think that the way that it's worded here makes it seem like the body is going to do the investigation, and I don't think that was the original tension in your conversation. So there definitely needs to be on the list a note to do some wordsmithing there to make it very clear that that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we had brainstormed though initially from that list was to ensure the investigation of all allegations of excessive force or those related to discrimination. So that's what we came up with. So the subcommittee tried to put that in here. So what I'm hearing is that that's something that needs to be either removed entirely or changed. And so what I would like to see is suggestions on removing it entirely, or amendments to the language to change it, or what you would like to see in the purpose statement.
So, okay, I'm trying to just kind of get my head around this. This is the purpose. This is such an important piece. So there's a part of me that has been really hearing what Cami has been saying about try not to be too specific. Be specific enough, but not too specific. And obviously, we want to have the authority to be able to investigate these, serious allegations of misconduct. My thought, and this is just thinking out loud, my thought is that would probably be more appropriate in the authority. And then thinking about what is the purpose of this body, it is to do more of the general, like the create transparency, to include community, to strengthen relationships, to do those more kind of general, and then this is how. When we get to the authority, this is how we do it. And then that way, it's kind of like our mission statement. We go back to, does the how really meet this need, which is transparency, community, relationship building, trust, and those things that we wanted when we said, why are we here? We want to do this.
So agreed. And I think when we discussed this initially, there were like 3 different bullet points that talked about trust and transparency and accountability and all that kind of stuff. So we consolidated that here into the statement in an effort to promote and build trust, transparency, and accountability. So do we feel like we need to add more to that statement? There were other examples like increased communication between the public, the police department, and the oversight commission, encourage civilians to take part in the process, build trust and strengthen the relations between law enforcement and the community it serves. Those were all examples that we had brainstormed together that we consolidated into this one statement. So I'm wondering if this is enough, or we need to add more to that.
I think the relationship one was important. I think we had talked about that in our first committee meeting. So
Can you say that again, Mary?
What we had at our first committee was build trust and strengthen the relations between law enforcement and the community it serves. So relationship building. And I think that goes to what Lizzie was talking about in terms of how we then go about doing that, with the authorities and all of that. It will connect to that as a goal. It's a goal, that's all.
Jordan, were you trying to say something, or was it you, Rich? I couldn't see anybody, but I could hear someone trying to get in.
It was me, but Rich, you go ahead.
I was just saying that I liked that last comment, the strengthen relations. And I'm wondering if it's more general in the sense that the oversight entity will promote and build trust, transparency, and accountability to strengthen relations between law enforcement and the community it serves, as a very generalized overstatement. So mainly, rather than going into the will, it's just it is doing that first part and bringing in the second part. That's all.
Because I think that's not our only goal. Just one.
I like that as being one of them, though. I think that was well phrased. And I almost wonder if it's easier to do bullet points and come to consensus on all of the goals, and then send the drafting work group to come back with statements based on those goals that we have consensus on.
Well, and I think that's why we presented both, because you can see the benefits of having both, right? But the thing with the bullets is that they kind of also get a little bit more specific. And that was kind of my preference, was for like Berkeley, Madison, some of the other ones, like they just had a very clear and concise purpose statement. And the other ones were just like long lists of things that we could do. Because I wonder, like, if we go the list route, if we'll be like, what do we add? What do we take away? Or like, it will be like continuously adding versus like bringing it together in a concise statement. Because again, it's like the purpose. But go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I think I agree. I would love if we had kind of a statement rather than a bulleted list. But I feel like if we're gonna maybe do this bit where we're kind of parsing out which ones we like or don't like, the list is maybe a bit more useful for discussion. Because I mean, if we're looking at this as a paragraph, and I hope this isn't too wordsmithy, but like the way this sentence is structured, what is centered is the only active verb is like providing opportunities for community input. And that feels too specific. Like it's definitely part of our purpose, but it's, in an effort to do all this about the policies, procedures, whatever. But what's really centered in this statement is will provide opportunities for community input. And that feels too specific, I guess, as like it comes across linguistically as like the main purpose of this.
So would you like me to go to the list so that we can kind of look at it that way for a minute, see if there's anything else? I'll definitely move over the strengthen relations between law enforcement and the community so that is there. Is everybody okay with that?
I think so.
Yeah, because I think all this language is in the bulleted list as well, right?
Right. I just
in
didn't know
a different order. And...
No, some of it had been taken out, but.
Oh, okay. I'm already forgetting the bulleted list.
Yeah.
Okay. Jordan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think something about the strengthening relations between law enforcement and community serve sounds great, but it for me in that structure, it's putting law enforcement outside of the community, and that is rough for me. And so I was thinking strengthening relations to integrate law enforcement into the community it serves, like something a little bit more instead of putting them against each other. But this again is going to wordsmithing, which goes to the drafting group. So I don't know.
I don't think that's wordsmithing. I think that's a really important like value-based distinction, which is kind of I think that's a really great point.
Maybe better integrate.
Better integrate works.
I think that some folks probably feel that law enforcement is already a very strong member of their community. I think there's some, some groups, some individuals who feel like there's us and then law enforcement, and then there's also folks who don't have that relationship with law enforcement at all, and they would feel like law enforcement is already a big part of their community. So I just want to kind of throw that in there as well.
And Cami, were you adding that to the the third point? That the integration will come from strengthening the relationship?
I didn't add it to the second one because it's really a different way of saying it. So I just restated it as Jordan did.
Okay, because I don't know that necessarily strengthening law enforcement is necessarily.
Did I leave relations out?
Yeah, sorry.
That's kind of an important word.
To better integrate law enforcement.
Yeah.
Into the
right. To better.
Good catch, Mary.
Thank you.
I keep pointing to it, but I know you can't see my finger, so.
Okay. Yeah, always please feel free to let me know when I completely type something different than what you actually said.
Something that I keep coming back to when I'm reading our purpose statement is I want to find somewhere in here, and I also want to hear your thoughts on this, but somewhere in here to acknowledge maybe why this civilian oversight was founded, whether we can say it's from like community demands, whether we want to say it was a push from healing justice or both. I really do want to find a way. I don't know if we want to include that in the purpose or in another section that it might fit in better, but I do want to find somewhere in here to remind the future commission, like this is why this was established. This is why, we are creating this oversight commission. So yeah, I guess just to remind the future commission, and then maybe to add something as well that says, I really want to stress the independence of this commission, that it is not a part of law enforcement. It's on behalf of the community, but it's also independent in its own way. So emphasis of independence, reminding of why it's being established. And maybe also acknowledging the calls from the community for this. I don't know how else to state that, but I want to include that somewhere in here.
Well, once there's a writing group, I would imagine something like that maybe is in an introduction or background or something.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
And, because calls have come up other times, over the last couple of decades. Maybe something about just the national climate last year that resulted from the George Floyd incident. So maybe having that, again, once the writing group is together, I think that, because that is good, you want that to then flow into, and here's what we are recommending.
I like the idea, that's beautiful. And I wonder if maybe we can have like a separate section, like an acknowledgement section. So maybe not necessarily in the purpose, but a separate section acknowledging the history of this formation, acknowledging maybe the local landscape as well and how it fits into the national landscape, because that's what we are dealing with here. That's, we're responding to both. And I think that's a beautiful way to honor it. Thank you for suggesting that, Serafina.
Yeah, but actually that just reminded me, that brings up a good point. Is that because it is so important, I think I would want to push to include this in the purpose, because that history is so important, that how this came about, because this didn't just come about one day the city council decided this. This was a push from many, many members of the community. And I think that should be reminded and is part of the purpose of this future commission is to serve those community members, especially from Healing Justice and Black Lives Matter, that they made a huge call for this. And that I think that is a huge part of the purpose of this commission, is to connect with those community members and say, we hear you, we're here for you. We are, we're still going to be independent, because that's part of their job, is to be independent and rigorous in their investigations. But I definitely think that it's hard to separate the history and this commission, because it's so intertwined in that way.
And can you guys still hear me? Because I can see that I'm frozen.
Yes.
Okay. And it never freezes.
You're talking, but your mouth isn't moving. Yeah.
Right. There are a lot of ordinances out there that do include that purpose piece. And so I think that that's a fantastic idea to kind of memorialize the why.
Yeah, and so I totally agree with all those things. And I think that when we look at the brainstorm, there were things that were removed because we thought maybe they would be fit elsewhere better, right? That it's not necessarily that we're taking it out, it's that maybe they don't speak to the broader purpose, right? It's like a broader mission statement, purpose statement, right, for the commission. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to get at too, because it seems like we've added a bunch more things, which is not a problem at all. It's great, but we do have to get to a concise purpose statement summary. Maybe it doesn't have to be concise. Maybe it's like 6 pages long, but that's kind of what I'm trying to get a better read on from the other commissioners, is what needs to be added to the summary that already is here, right? We have promoting and building trust. We have the relationships piece that we want to add. We have, this opportunity for people to give input. And then we also have just the purpose is oversight, right? The purpose is independent oversight of the department. And so those are 3 things that are here presently. I'm trying to get at what else needs to be added. Is that 3 things too many things, or are there other things that should be in the purpose statement?
I think something I would like to see is, rather than how it's phrased here, ensure the independent investigation of misconduct allegations, is ensure fair investigation of complaints of all kinds. Because what I'm looking, I think for the purpose, what I'm hoping, and I think it goes to what Cami was saying, is hopefully this purpose can help us make the tough, or guide us in the tough decisions we're going to have to make later on when we're discussing authorities and discussing different sort of procedures, that we can look back to this and it can guide us. So if it's strengthen relations to better integrate law enforcement, that could be used to help us strengthen or help us make a decision one way or another. Ensure fair investigation of complaints. That also, we can then ask ourselves later in the process, does this authority accomplish the goal that we set out in the purpose statement?
I'm going to make, maybe this is just restating the suggestion from earlier, but I feel like, it's difficult to get 2, even 3 big ideas into one sentence. I feel like what I'd love to have consensus on is the commission get to some consensus on a bulleted list, right? And then I feel like, trying to get it into a really nice, long, clausal sentence will take a lot of wordsmithing. I mean, it just will. But it sounds like there's enough that it's coming out to be added that I'd love, I guess, yeah, I'd like to go to a bulleted list where we can actually see okay, here's 5, 6, even 7 things, and does everybody come to consensus around those.
I kind of had a feeling that that would be where this conversation would go. And so I'm wondering if it would be useful for us to vote on the form and then get consensus on the form and then work towards the substance.
You mean by form, do you mean bullet point or
By
paragraph?
form, I mean either say it as one long clausal sentence or say it as multiple bulleted items.
Well, just for reference, you can, like, if you look at some of the purposes that are more in a paragraph form, you can use multiple sentences. Like we don't have to fit all 7 thoughts into one sentence.
That was going to be my statement, is why does it have to be one sentence? I mean, can it be multiple sentences, and does it have to be bulleted? So I don't particularly understand why we're focused on.
And I'm not voting for a bulleted form in the end result. I'm saying for the purpose of discussion, it seems like we're thinking better by thinking it of bulleted points, right? Like.
So how about I move?
Maybe,
Oh, go ahead, Christian. I'm sorry.
maybe it's like an arbitrary discussion, but when we looked at the other ordinances, it seems that there were like 2 different ways to approach the purpose statement, right? You can either bullet out and say in the actual ordinance, these are all the things that are the purpose, or you can write a paragraph, 1 sentence, 2 sentences. Most of them were rather short. That doesn't mean ours has to be. But that's where we were drawing inspiration from on these. If we think neither of those is a good one, I think Serafina in one of our discussions had mentioned doing both, doing a paragraph and then also bulleting stuff. So there's definitely options here, but I think like where I wanted to get on the form is like, how long do we want this to be, right? Like as far as describing the purpose, is the 2 sentence paragraph adequate, or is it not? And we should go to a bulleted list that says everything we want to say plainly and sectioned out.
I think it's going to be as long as it needs to be for us to feel like it says what we want it to say. Like I feel like we're like putting some kind of formal cart before the horse of saying, are we going to vote on a bulleted list versus sentences like that, right? Like we're not even there yet, are we?
No, and again, we're not a writing committee. We're not writing the final report. I think focused on the ideas or what we want to have as a purpose. I don't know about voting on all of this.
Cami?
Just as a matter of process, would it be helpful if I took the list that we have kind of been creating, we'll move it over to the already bulleted list, and then we can start deciding what on the bulleted list you would like to get rid of and which of the ones that you'd like to keep. And that will give a great roadmap to the drafting committee for creating this new either multi-sentence paragraph or paragraph bulleted list at a later time.
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to move forward to that.
Okay. Okay. So this first, the third point here, the strengthened relations between law enforcement and the community it serves. Am I okay to take that out because of the reworking of that sentence or that point later down the bullet list?
I think so.
I would say yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't.
But I'm just wondering, so thinking further about like, what does that mean to strengthen relationships? And I just wonder if it's really, yes, that's true. I'm a strong believer in relationship building and strengthening and fostering and tending. And I wonder if it's more about ensuring trust.
I think we have the build trust,
Okay.
although we don't have trust with what. Yeah. Include community, increase.
Is it strengthening relations, build trust? And then I forget what the other part was. Build trust, strengthen relationships, to better integrate law
It is
enforcement
up
into
there.
the
Yes,
community.
you're right. Yeah. It's
So
A.
that is one statement, yeah.
And build trust. Okay.
Yeah, it's bullet point A, Cami.
Okay. Bear with me here. Okay. Is that how you'd like it to read?
So, you know, my orientation is in restorative practices and mediation, and so I'm very comfortable in that role where I try to bring in multiple perspectives. And so when I'm on the Fire and Police Commission, I'm often bringing in the perspective of folks who may not have good relationships with law enforcement. And what I find is in this group, I tend to bring in the perspective of folks who do have strong relationships with law enforcement. So I preface that by saying when I see build trust and strengthen relationships, I'm thinking about the portions of our community who already have trust and strong relationships. So I just wonder about changing build to ensure.
Increase.
Strengthen trust and relations.
So ensure trust and strengthen relations, or strengthen trust and relations?
My preference is ensure trust and strengthen relations.
Okay. Any? Okay, I'm just looking at faces to make sure no one has anything else to say.
I think ensure means the same thing as like build and strengthen, right? Or build and promote. I don't want to erase communities that trust does need to be built with. I think would be a concern, but I think ensure covers that. So are we
wordsmithing now? Because if we are, ensure doesn't actually grammatically make sense there, unfortunately. Like, I get what you're saying, meaning wise, but like it doesn't work if we're actually making that into a sentence. But again, I mean, I feel like that's wordsmithing, but there was a long pause, so I couldn't help myself. Sorry.
Well, I really appreciate this process. I'm glad that we're having this type of conversation, and it felt a little clunky and a little maybe uncomfortable at first, but I think what we're doing right now is really getting into the purpose, and that's great. So thank you, everybody.
Hopefully we'll get better as we move along. So just so I'm clear, we're sort of pulling out stuff that's not purpose related from this list and we're kind of reworking some of the stuff to build a roadmap to go back and rewrite this.
I also, yes, and I also think Cami was trying to delete some stuff too, or
Yeah.
find agreements among us to simplify it.
Right, and so again, like, sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
No, you go, that's fine.
Well, I just want to get to, like, what is the list of things that must go into the purpose statement? Like, that's kind of what we want to get to, because I think that there are some things when we were deliberating in our first meeting where it was like, there are some of these things that maybe can go elsewhere, and then there are some of these things that absolutely must be in the purpose. And that's how we came up with the 2 examples that we came up with. And so, like, I would like to see more direction from the commission on what the things are that, like, what's the minimum amount of things that need to go into the purpose statement to make it, from the list, to make it a viable purpose statement. Because if we go back and write it again, and then we still have the same conversation, right, where things are missing or whatever. So that's what I'm trying to get to, just to help the drafting process.
I'm noticing here that we don't have any term like transparency. Is that I just want to, is that, oh, Cami said, hold on.
No, it was in there before.
It was in there? Okay, because I was wondering, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jordan. No, go.
I was wondering if it says to further trust, transparency, and relations to better integrate law enforcement with the community could be a nice start, but
That's,
Can you say that again, Jordan?
yeah, to further trust, transparency, and relations to better integrate law enforcement with community. Because further can meet anybody where they're at.
Yeah. Nailed it. Yeah.
So in the other example, we had in an effort to promote and build trust, transparency, and accountability. Do we want to include accountability in there as well? And then Rich had kind of reworded that statement. We added strengthen relations to that, like, string of things that we want to do.
Yeah, I was just trying to make it broader, to be honest. So I'm fine with making it more specific.
Rich, can I ask why make it more broader? Because I think that could be a good point as well.
I was trying to take Cami's advice in terms of, I imagine we're going to get into later what the oversight committee is actually doing. I kind of view it as just like a mission statement. Like, for my nonprofit, our mission statement is very broad, but our work is much more specific. And so that's, I don't know if all of this needs to be decided right here. And I don't think we need to put everything in this one statement. Like, I think that we could be a little broader and work it out later, but that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Rich. I like your 2 cents. It's great.
in what you just reworked, Jordan, how do you, because Christian mentioned the word accountability, which is something that came up in the working group, and that word could currently be used in there, because I really like what Rich just said, and I think that this can be something where there are these words that people, first of all, need to hear, that's why you're doing this. And then it also will be helpful as you're doing your authorities and jurisdictions. You can say, this is how we're going to be transparent, and this is how we're going to be accountable, and this is how. So making sure you have all of those words that are the things you want to fulfill through the actions that the oversight mechanism will take on, that might help kind of form how you round this out. But I do think that the language, I love to further, I think it really gets to what Lizzie was talking about and promoting. I mean, I think this is looking really good. And I think that this isn't too specific. I think you might need to talk about what you want to, we talked about investigations earlier, and you might want to talk about at some point, are there things in here you want to take out? But
well, I think to Gabe's point, adding language about ensuring fair investigation of complaints without using qualifying words like all or describing like the specific type of complaint is broad enough to also make oversight, right, part of the purpose.
But I think since we're not proposing an investigative commission, that it needs to be clear, I guess, ensure through the through the process that we're establishing. I don't know. It somehow has to be clear that we're not doing it's not a new investigative body.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction.
Maybe through the use of the auditor monitor, who, I don't know.
But it seems like this one is like a sticking one with the commission, and so that's where I would like to like either massage this language into like an acceptable format so we can go back and write it, or like get clarity on like whether we want to include it in the purpose statement at all.
I guess I see it under the authorities. I mean, that's where we kind of break it up as to who's doing what.
But so would it be just oversee?
Yeah, I mean, oversight, the word oversight, I feel like is part of that, isn't that? Independent oversight is, doesn't that incorporate investigation and things like that? Or oversee is what Jordan just said?
I would say yes.
Ensure the fair oversight of investigations.
And making sure that we say independent?
Well, if you put independent in there, in the model that you've developed, Santa Barbara Police Department does the initial investigation. So, and more than likely the investigations.
That we can say that because I heard that we want to make sure that it's clear to the community that we are separate, right? So then is there a term that the commission as a group that we can use to say that we are an independent entity?
I think you can say independent, just not with the word investigation.
Right.
Like independent community oversight would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Right.
Because we were talking about things like in our early committees, policies, training, kind of a lot of elements that, again, with the auditor monitor, we would be evaluating.
So I do want to throw this out there. We're at the 7 o'clock mark, and we still have to discuss the auditor monitor portion. So Tammy, I don't know if you think it would be useful to take a break and then come back, and or the group, if you all want to kind of try to find some consensus on maybe the ideas. So we know we want accountability, we know we want transparency, we know we have a really nice sentence about furthering trust and transparency and strengthening relationships. Is there other items that we want to add that might be helpful?
I think that's probably enough items.
I will say that this conversation has really helped solidify, I think, better what the commission as a whole envisions this piece to be. So I think that that will help the working group tremendously in their next round.
And which is kind of what you want the purpose to do, you know, is sort of, it introduces, you know, the general themes of what's coming next.
Yeah, and thanks for engaging, everyone. Feedback is a gift. So hopefully what we bring back will hit this a little bit more. But I just, again, like we're trying to, you know, consolidate and summarize too. So like a lot of this stuff is repetitive, I think. So like I think we've got some more clarity on what like distinct pieces we want to see like come into like a purpose statement. But yeah, any other feedback you have about stuff that's missing would help expedite our ability to move on to other sections.
Great. Great job, everyone. And great job to the drafting group. No, it's not easy. So with that, I think it's a good time to take a break. So want to say a 13-minute break. We'll come back at 7:10. Oh, open up public comment before we do. No.
Give me 1 second.
Are we still shooting for 7:30 to be done? Because I kind of had, I might have to go, that's all.
I think it would be helpful. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Sure.
I was just going to say, I think it would be really helpful if we could go just a little bit longer than that to discuss the auditor monitor piece. I know we try to hit the 2-hour mark, but it's going to be really important that we make some progress on this, because we're going to suggest having another drafting group work on the auditor monitor, getting started on that one as well. So having some good feedback will be helpful.
Cool. Okay, then I'd need a 15-minute break, I guess, is a good idea, because
yeah,
got to do some things.
Sam, if you could open up public comment, please, and then we'll go into a break.
Sure. If there is anyone in the public that would like to speak on item 6, the drafting work group discussion, please raise your hand. There is no one that has indicated they'd like to speak. Sure.
Thank you, Sam. So we will close this item and we will go to a 15-minute recess. We'll come back at 7:15. See you all soon.
Thanks. Okay.
Welcome back to the Community Formation Commission meeting on October 27th, 2021. We'll call the meeting back to order at 7:16 p.m. and we will work on our next agenda item. Excuse me. It is item 7, discussion on auditor and monitor authorities and procedures. Cami from NACOL will facilitate a discussion with the CFC on the authorities and procedures of the auditor monitor portion of the hybrid oversight model. And Cami, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Gabe. Sam, can you allow me to share my screen, please? Perfect. I'm going to assume you can all see it. So I want to take a minute to just go over a few things about the auditor monitor model before we jump into our brainstorming session. Tonight, I think that really all we're going to get to is doing some brainstorming on authority and jurisdiction, but something else that I want you all to start thinking about, and it will be very important, is how the auditor monitor operates in relation to the board and what that relationship looks like. There are examples, there are plenty of examples where that relationship has not been clearly defined and it causes issues with the entity itself. So kind of thinking about some of those relationships are down the line are going to help the entity be more effective and sustainable. And we'll get to what that might look like, some examples, kind of like we've done in the past, to give you a starting point for your thoughts on that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is we always refer to auditor monitor model in NACOL. And it occurred to me that some might wonder, well, what is the difference between the two? And in a lot of ways, auditor is a much more focused piece in civilian oversight. An individual authorized to review and verify the accuracy of records and ensure that an agency complies with applicable laws, policies, and procedures. A monitor is a little bit broader. However, when we're talking about monitors, some people use the term auditor interchangeably. Sometimes people use the term inspector general interchangeably. So all of those are types of monitors. However, in civilian oversight, there are definitely models where they call them the independent police monitor or the independent police auditor. So like in San Jose, it is absolutely an auditor model because that's what they have chosen to outline in their model. Whereas in Denver, it is a monitor. In LA, it's an inspector general. So it is somewhat interchangeable, but a monitor is a much more broad definition. Someone who's assessing the police department's performance, that monitors with a core mission of typically providing ongoing assurance that internal investigations by law enforcement are thorough, fair, and unbiased, and that police practices in this regard are transparent. So they're monitoring the activities of law enforcement. There is a lot of reporting that goes on, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So just as I'm going to go through this quickly because I know it's late, and I want to reserve the best of what you have left in you for the brainstorming. So the range of authority can be everything from complaint intake and classification, community engagement. I know we talked about community engagement with the board as well, but also the auditor monitor also has a role to play in that. Sometimes involving themselves in ongoing investigations by observing the investigation pieces, like the interviews, sometimes being able to submit questions, overseeing the overall direction of the investigation. Sometimes they have the ability to monitor the disciplinary process in order to ensure fairness and consistency, and that it's conducted always according to the department's disciplinary protocols. And then also making recommendations regarding aspects of the law enforcement agency, like policies, procedures, training. The structure of the auditor monitor is often that it is staffed with a professional or group of professionals who have different roles to play in the model. They often have backgrounds in social sciences, auditing, data analysis, law enforcement, and community outreach, and often have education in these areas or experience related to these areas. They often cover the overall complaint process, including or as well as discipline, training, staffing, recruitment, use of force, crime prevention strategies. So these are all things that they might monitor. They often have very broad access to department records and information in order to do the work and carry out their mandate. They often have the ability to audit both civilian and internally generated complaints, but that is not always the case. May conduct audits and reviews of select aspects and operations of the department. For instance, an auditor or monitor might decide to look at the use of force reporting system for a law enforcement agency, and then see how it's working, see where it might have deficiencies, and then make recommendations as a result of that monitoring or investigation that it's done on those specific pieces. And then some say one of the best pieces of this model is its robust reporting requirements. We've talked a lot about transparency tonight, and those reports add transparency to the process because they're not only sharing information that they have learned about law enforcement policies, procedures, actions. It also is providing a window for the community to see how the oversight entity is functioning, the type of work they're doing, the type of recommendations that they're making, how those recommendations are being implemented or considered. So the reporting requirement is pretty essential to this model. Strengths include, I think first and foremost, it's a very proactive model. Can identify systemic issues with how complaints are handled, effectiveness of things such as early warning systems and discipline. And because it has this transparent base to it, it really is able to garner community trust in a way that I think other oversight mechanisms sometimes have to work a little harder because they're not necessarily producing as many reports. Some of the challenges is that it relies heavily on access to data. If they can't get the data, it really can't do the work. The identifying patterns and trends requires a lot of work, a lot of data collection, a lot of analysis. So you have to ensure that they have the structure, the staffing to be able to do what they've been asked to carry out. Not to mention the monitor needs to have the skills to do those things. And that it's also important that auditor and monitor, the work that they do is really dependent on the quality of the data they get. A lot of times we hear that monitors face issues in some of the work that they're doing because the data can be flawed because of underreporting from marginalized groups, that maybe they don't have all of the information they need to really come to good assessments. But I will say that those that have good working relationships with law enforcement agencies, that's one of the benefits, is that they're able to work through that. And then in the end, both the law enforcement agency and the monitor benefit from better data collection. So when we're talking about authority and jurisdiction, I just wanted to throw out some examples to kind of get you to start thinking about things. So this could be things like monitoring policy compliance, monitoring programs of SBPD, activities, investigations, use of force incidents, being able to do annual reporting, developing and issuing reports and policy recommendations. So often anytime an audit is done, that there tends to always be policy recommendations that follow. Creating and supporting a system for receiving and processing complaints, since they often act when you've got this hybrid where you have the board and the auditor or monitor. You have not only does that monitor staff the board or can staff the board, they also helped to be that system where they can take complaints, they can help process them, forward them on for investigation, bring them back, and give access to the board to them. So they also kind of act as that staff support to the process as a whole. recommending additional investigation of complaints if necessary, community stakeholder outreach, access to records and data as allowable by law. And then there's also some things to consider that we see in ordinances about the necessity to maintain confidentiality, to follow all applicable state and local laws. So those are some things to consider. So with that in mind, I'd like to just open it up for some of the things you'd like to see this monitor piece be able to do.
One question, Cami.
Yes.
You have provide staff support, but are there examples where the auditor monitor position maybe is hired first and helps to recruit and the commissioners that are appointed, or works with city council to do that?
Yes.
I guess maybe that comes in. You were going to talk about the relationship with the committee, but
yeah, and we can talk about that more, but it is a good question. So there's examples of it working in a couple of different ways. So in some cities that, like Boulder, Colorado is an excellent example. They have a fairly new oversight mechanism. I think it's maybe a year old, maybe a little older. They hired their monitor first, who is helping set up the agency, and now they are just moving into the part where they're going to bring in the review board members. Madison is the opposite example. They brought in the review board members because their board has the ability to hire the monitor. They are in charge of that process. So they're coming in first, and they are relying on city staff to help them through that entire process.
How's that going?
I think that the second time they do it, it will be easier because they're having to start. I mean, everything is brand new. There was no oversight mechanism at all. So they're having to do a lot of training, and there's a huge learning curve, and they're also having to learn about HR issues at the same time, and learning how to create job descriptions and oral boards and oral benchmarks, which is a lot. I think talking to a commission who has spent a lot of time learning, I think you guys will understand what that learning curve looks like. However, I will say that the reason they did it that way is because it does add a level of independence for the monitor from city government that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise have. But there are other ways to add that independence, but that's how they felt would be the best way to achieve it there.
Cami, you pulled out a lot of great examples here of duties, authorities for the auditor monitor. I mean, personally, like, I don't see anything on the examples list here that I wouldn't want to include in the authority and jurisdiction of an auditor monitor. And so I'm wondering if, like, there's anything any of the other commissioners see here that they wouldn't want to be part of the authorities as it relates to Santa Barbara.
There's nothing on here that I don't think that a commission should do, but I'm also thinking about how it may overlap with the Fire and Police Commission, because that commission, they don't have the authority to change policy, but they have the authority to advise the city council and to review and hear reports from the fire and police department. So things like monitoring programs, activities, programs and activities is, it's probably not as important as investigations and use of force incidents. I think you'll see, at least in our department, the policy compliance is, it's done. So these things are very important. I'm just also thinking about where do we want the focus of the commission? Community stakeholder outreach. I think that's, I mean, obviously it's important, but I think that's kind of inherent. Yeah, so I'm just, as I'm looking at that, that's my initial thoughts, but I also, you know, I think that we need to have a review. We need to look at maybe conducting climate surveys. And if it's not this commission that does it, but I mean the oversight body that does it, perhaps that's something that the Fire and Police Commission should do. But thinking about policy, I think it's also important to think about how does the overall community feel? You know, how is the relationships, the perceptions, the needs? What does the community want more of? And I think you can find a lot of that out in the climate surveys. Do we want to have a time frame? Like, do we want to say that the authority and jurisdictions will be reviewed every 5 to 7 years?
The authority, in the ordinance, you mean? Okay.
I think we want to look at procedural justice and legitimacy.
Mm-hmm. I think in addition to Fire and Police Commission, the engaging with the Civil Service Commission, so that's just something that's going to have to be worked out. You know, John's not here, but I mean, since we're not talking about necessarily opening up the charter, one way or the other, this person will need to establish relationships with them, Civil Service and Fire and Police Commission, and engage on a regular basis, I'd say.
So the way that some of the other ordinances delineate that is by saying that as part of monitoring the program's activities, investigations, and use of force incident, that they can make, that the committee will make referrals to the Police and Fire Commission. Is that something that we would want to include, like specifically as part of monitoring programs, activities, investigations, and use of force incidents?
Referrals or recommendations?
The language that I saw says referrals. Specifically regarding like initiating disciplinary action or other items.
I think it's an interesting idea where if the commission comes on something in their review of information that's actually under the purview of police and fire, that they can refer it to that commission so that they can take instead it's under their purview.
What about making recommendations to the chief of police?
I think that should definitely be part of it. I don't think I see on here policy recommendations, so reviewing policy and procedures.
Mm-hmm. And training.
And training.
If I could ask a question, a clarifying question is, making recommendations to the chief of police, would that come straight from the auditor monitor, or would the auditor monitor go to the review board with recommendations, and then those would have to be reviewed and approved by the review board, because that would be the opportunity for community input, is my thought.
So maybe making recommendations to the chief of police through the review board, like that's the first stop.
Mm-hmm.
And you, Gabe, are you, just to clarify, are you talking about also having them approve the recommendations? Can I put the word approve in there?
I think for me, I'd like it to be approved, because I think that's kind of from that's the community's opportunity and community voice, and so I could be persuaded to just have it go through the review board, so it's just presented there, but I think my preference would be that it's approved by the review board.
Cami, can you give examples, or is that how you see that sort of role in the review audit and monitor process, that some things go first to the review board?
Yeah, so that is not uncommon for there to be a relationship where the monitor really brings the information when they have findings, recommendations, that is presented to the board. There does need to be some clarification, like particularly with reports. You want to make sure there's some boundaries there so that reports rely on the data and not on personal perceptions or political climates. You want it to rely on the data itself. But it's not uncommon for that information to go to the community. Just like, for instance, if the board reviews an investigation done by SBPD, then it's really the board that then might direct the monitor to request additional information or to initiate an investigation if they're not able to get satisfaction through the additional information. So there's also that kind of relationship where they can go back and forth. So not only would the monitor bring information to them, but then they could also have the ability to request information from or action from the monitor themselves. A good and interesting example of that is in Tucson. The board is actually a completely separate entity from the auditor there, and the auditor does not staff the board, but the board does have the ability to say, we're seeing complaints on this, this, and this, and we'd like you to conduct an audit on this. And so even though they're not connected, they still have that kind of relationship where the board has a say in some of the process.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, the monitor that we're speaking of is basically a staff person. The review board that we're talking about is the oversight body. And then, so the staff person would present reports, and that's what it looks like in our current city process now. A staff person presents reports to the finance committee. The finance committee approves it and then sends it to city council for a vote. So that's essentially what we're doing already, except it's not city council that's approving it. It would be the chief. So that makes sense. One thing I do want to caution is that our current process now does allow for public participation, and it's simply through public comment. So if we really want the board, the oversight body, to be community centered, we need to be more specific, I think, or at least be to have something more than just community input, because that leaves the door open for a simple public comment, and then we can say we got public input. So just kind of thinking about that.
Well, isn't part of that though through the review board itself? Those are community members that are appointed for oversight. Maybe they'd have.
And if that worked, the Fire and Police Commission would be doing everything that we want the oversight body to do. So it's not, that is not, because we're all community people and we're all appointed, and it's not enough. So I just think we should do something to show that we want more than public comment.
And if I can jump in, I cannot agree with you more, Lizzie. And I see too often that in our trying to get public input, we fall back on what's minimally required rather than actually trying to get the input that we want. So I think there's a lot of value in actually requiring or making it one of the key tasks of the auditor monitor is that we actually go out to people and meet them where they're at versus expecting them to come to us for that 2-minute public comment.
Yeah, just to back that up even further, on the previous slide when you were mentioning the sort of potential strengths of this model, but the challenges, like one of them was specifically dealing with underrepresented data, right, from the most vulnerable populations or things like that. So yeah, I mean, whatever we can do to sort of ensure that that challenge is actually actively addressed in the way we write this up, because that's unlike necessarily relying on someone else to give you data. That seems like partly something that we can control through being really direct in our language.
I think under the community stakeholder outreach, I mean, that'll be about a number of things, but specifically what we're talking about is complaints or input on procedures, policy, training. I mean, I could envision there be ad hoc committees that would be commissioners and some members of the public, the auditor monitor.
Do you think it would be appropriate to have a review for this body to review the staff person? Because right now I think staff is reviewed by or overseen by the city administrator. And we want to make sure that the staff person assigned to this is, has a great relationship, a good working relationship with the oversight body. So that they trust that the material and information and data is accurate and reflective. So would it be appropriate for this oversight body to have like every 3 or 5 year review of the staff person? Or is that kind of stepping on city?
The charter.
Yeah.
I think that in doing evaluation of the person, that the city manager or whoever's designee is or HR would consult with the commission for input.
Oops, sorry.
Like a 360 kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
A great example of how that can work is in Denver. Actually, I think it's yearly. They do a review of the monitor, and it is a collection. So there are members appointed from the review board. So they have, I think, 2 members. They also have a public safety director, or in her case, city administrator. So it's a collection of different people. There's also often someone from law enforcement, so they can get the perspective of how the person is interacting with law enforcement. And so it's kind of this bringing in all the different angles and getting a very good 360 view of how the monitor is doing. And whether you do that every other year, every 3 years, every year, that's up to you. But I always thought that was an interesting way of doing it, so that it was a very holistic process.
I mean, I'd say every year, at least to start with.
What about, sorry, whoever was gonna go ahead.
I think it's
Oh,
you.
okay. So subpoena power, right, or the ability to issue subpoenas.
The auditor monitor? What?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because, like, in some of the other ordinances, the monitor has the power to issue subpoenas for documentation, for witnesses, right, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess I don't see that as too feasible, but yeah.
Why not?
Well, I think John has talked about that at one point. I think the only body that can is the Civil Service Commission.
Right now.
Right, and we're saying, because I think we haven't gotten to the part about the ability to initiate outside investigation or something like that. So at that point, that person or process might do that. Is that what you're thinking of when there is an investigation? Because since it's not,
yeah, like, to the extent permitted by like the legal considerations. But then on that note as well, because like we're kind of discussing this, like retaining an investigative body as necessary, right, to do investigations. So I'm wondering if like the authority would be to actually retain independent legal counsel.
well, the city, I mean, you mean apart from the city attorney, I guess. Yeah.
Christian, do you mean outside of the chosen investigator, or is that legal counsel the investigator you're talking about?
So I'm wondering if you're retaining like an independent investigator to investigate as necessary, if that wouldn't also include the need to retain independent legal counsel.
Yeah,
Like,
they're two separate things. So I think, so in some cases, oversight entities, sometimes they just have independent legal counsel. I think in a smaller jurisdiction, it's having the ability in case there is some kind of conflict of interest where you feel like you need to bring in someone outside of the city who's representing both so you don't have the same person representing the oversight board and SBPD, for instance, if there's some kind of conflict. The other is being able, unless you have a monitor and one of their requirements is that they are a trained investigator, then bringing in the ability to bring in trained independent investigators if the board initiates that action.
Okay.
it seems like a lot of the other ordinances get pretty specific in some cases on like what kinds of investigations the monitor has jurisdiction over. So like I've noticed in a couple of them, they will like very clearly say like internal affairs investigations, like in the language about investigations. And I'm wondering if that like language would be necessary or if it would be too limiting. And then it also in a lot of them, the types of like what is being investigated gets like specified. So for example, like it'll say like carve out like incidences of use of force. And I'm wondering if like we would want to like specifically name any type of complaint or like investigation, or if we would want to keep it broad.
I say keep it broad because we're not recommending an investigative body. So
So, adding on to what Christian said previously, the ability to issue subpoenas, and I think it's important to have the conversation around Pitch's motion, and I'm not sure if that applies to this area or if that's specific to the investigative body.
I would
The
say that's
investigative
for
person.
investigator.
So,
Right.
yeah, so the ability to utilize an outside investigator as needed. Would there be a separate kind of authority for the investigative portion, or is that included in this auditor monitor? And if so, then I agree with Christian that we would want to include subpoena power in this, and then I would also highly recommend Pitch's motion in this.
So you can section it off essentially where if there is an independent investigation, then these things become, because a board who's the board that's not doing the investigation normally, who is not conducting hearings or anything like that, isn't going to really need it. Just the investigators are going to need it.
I would recommend that then, because I would caution, I guess, against a body having authority for all of this and not really have the training and experience to do it.
So having a section on, in the event that outside or additional investigation is recommended, these are the authorities.
And this might get a little too rabbit holey, but I wonder if it would be written into a charter or if it would be through a memorandum of understanding that there's access to these records.
I think we would need to be, or we, the body that we're recommending, would need to be in the charter. Because absent that, the city manager is in charge of everything.
As far as the independent investigation, because my understanding from what John said, and we'll probably have to go back and get a clarification, is that the ordinance that has these basic authorities in it, it can be just done through ordinance, that it won't require a charter change. If you're changing anything in regards to how this board interacts with the Fire and Police Commission or the Civil Service Commission, that might be an issue. But the last time we talked about it, I didn't like anything around investigations and the subpoena. My understanding was that it wouldn't require a charter change, but I definitely think we should get it clarified.
That was my recollection too, but we'll definitely follow up with the clarification.
And I just want to keep track of the time. So we are, I can't, it's too late for me to even be able to do the time change in my head.
No,
So,
I'm gonna have to sign up.
Okay. So I just want to, I can tell that everybody's slowing down a little bit. There's been a lot of discussion tonight. I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with what we have. If you want to throw a few more things out, and always remember that this is not a finalized list. If there are things we need to add to this list, just like we did the purpose today, and we doubled the purpose list today. So, but I really don't want to overwhelm you or fry your brains this evening by going through this.
Yeah.
I have one thing, and it's just something that I saw on, or I heard on the NAPOL videos, the conference videos, and it was, and I wrote it down in this section, but I don't know if it falls under this, but it was the ability to maintain independence and.
Lizzie, your sound isn't stable.
Sorry about that. I will read what they recommended, but it was essentially the ability to maintain independence and that the commission is there to do a job, to carry out the mandate of the office and to research and develop recommendations. And so in a sense, not work for a particular outcome, but work for the process. So I'm not sure if that falls here.
I think that's great too. And just maybe just a couple of little things like that might be like minute details, but like I assume that we would want the monitor to act as a member of the board, right? As like the executive secretary or in some capacity, right?
When you say executive secretary of the board, it was my understanding that there would be staff support for the board. So providing
what's the distinction?
Executive secretary sounds like they're a part of the board.
Yeah, and it's language that's not really used here anyways. They would need staff support. So when you're supporting a commission, just the administrative work, we don't have to tell Sam, but is a lot. So maybe that they would be hiring some staff support. The one other area, and it might be there because I'm kind of seeing double too, but is that I would see this person as coordinating, if not providing, the specialized training for the commissioners and as needed for the community.
Anything else anyone wants to add?
Maybe just really quick, sorry, I know I've added a lot. Some of the other ordinances break out like other duties as requested by the board, and I wonder if we want to add that in there just to make sure that we're covering stuff that maybe isn't cut and dry in the ordinance.
Kind of a catch-all. Okay. Okay, well, I think that this is a great list. And I will add it to our working document. Just a couple more things that I would like to talk about. We're not going to start brainstorming this one right now, but and you guys have actually brought up some of these things tonight, but when we're talking about relationships with the board, talking about what does staffing the board look like? One of the last things you talked about was, does the monitor staff the board, or is there a possibility of additional staff members who then help? what does that annual review look like, and what is is there also an annual review of the board itself, or the overall entity?
Right.
You know, in previous brainstorming, I think Rachel actually had mentioned the surveys, community surveys, and so that's kind of a great place to start for those reviews. The level of independence. I mean, there are some monitors who are hired and fired by their board. But then there are some who operate in collaboration with the board, but they do have some independence from them as well. So that's something that we need to think about, and what kind of recommendations you want to make around that. And then, you know, things like development of standard operating procedures. Is this something that you want the board to be in charge of? Because that really says a lot. Those guide the work on a daily basis of the oversight entity, and who creates those and who's responsible for those can be important. But it can also be a collaboration. It doesn't have to be necessarily one or the other. But if you want it to be a collaboration, it needs to be in the recommendations, because I can tell you where it's not specified, there are often problems. So, you know, because there isn't enough to think about in the next 2 weeks, I'd like you to add that to your list, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
When we're having this discussion as well, should we be thinking about qualifications, or would that be like a third conversation?
I would save that for now. I think as you get into I think those are things that we can talk about fairly easily as we're fine-tuning the recommendations. Qualifications for a monitor are fairly standard. There is some discrepancy. You know, there are people who believe monitors should be lawyers.
No.
As a non-lawyer, I tend to think, well, maybe not. But then there are those who really, they are very clear that education can be replaced with experience, and so they don't want to limit who they put in the position based on what degree they have. So it spans from one end of the spectrum to the other of how people handle that. But we can talk about that a little bit later. Because in the end, that's going to be more of a job description, and your recommendations may not get into that much specifics. That's also something you guys will have to decide. Okay, that's all I had. So let me close this out. The last thing that Gabe actually already brought it up, but Gabe, do you want to have the conversation about the additional working group? Do you want me to start that? How would you like to handle that?
You can handle it, Cami, unless you need my support.
I'm happy to. So I really think that because we now have started the work on the auditor piece, that and you all you really, I can tell, are getting a much better grasp of your vision for this, that it would really benefit the work if we had 2 drafting working groups going, and one working on the board piece and one working on the auditor monitor piece. And so I would like to propose that we go ahead and kind of initiate that process and see who would like to be part of that, unless there's any strong opposition to doing that. I mean, I think that there's a lot of work to be done in this area in the next couple of months. And so having the 2 working groups means we can get twice the work done.
So just so I'm clear, there's 4 members here today on the existing drafting subcommittee, and we would be not eligible for that one because of the Brown Act, right? Or like we would have to give up to go to the other one.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
It would be if there were 7 members that were deciding, making decisions on either of the groups. So if the numbers added to 7, then yes. But I think there could be crossover, but I think it's smart for us to divvy it up and kind of attack the 2 separately.
I guess my recommendation would just be that maybe it's they're smaller committees, like 3 people. It's a little unwieldy when you're working this stuff out. Have too many, but that's just my suggestion.
Do we have anyone who's interested in the writing group for the auditor monitor portion?
I'm really interested, but I feel like I haven't really, the past 2 weeks, I haven't really been a very good committee member on the other committee that I'm on right now. So I really want to, because this is really interesting to me. And quite honestly, tonight's meeting was my very favorite CFC meeting ever. So if I could like do it again, I would. But I want to respect my other committee members that I haven't been present. So I can't obviously do both.
And an idea too is that, I mean, some of us get busier at times and some of us get time that we free up. So these could be revolving participation on these drafting groups. It doesn't have to be the group that starts is the group that's finishing it, especially if we're doing regular check-ins.
Okay, well then I will volunteer, and I will promise myself and Rachel that I will be a better committee member.
I had really nice one-on-one conversations at both of the meetings where very few people showed up. But I just want to say, Gabe, I actually really like that idea of having like rotating, where like every meeting at 2 weeks, you know, few folks have had a crack at it, and then we discuss, and then maybe in the 2 weeks before that next meeting, it's another group of 3 people that take a crack at it. Like that actually seems really equitable too, in terms of honoring people's time and not like having to commit to too much, and also maybe getting all of us in small groups to really work on it. I mean, I'd love to commit to that, to be like, oh, I'd volunteer if it was just like, okay, for the next 2 weeks I'll focus on it, but then maybe not have to for the whole time.
And I would sort of echo that. I know that the education group has a lot coming up for November, given our responsibilities, you know, for the middle of November. So I do want to be on a writing group, but I am overwhelmed by the idea of joining another one at this moment. But if we can kind of commit to that rotating idea, I think that would be good.
And I mean, yeah, like that said too, Lizzie, to make you feel better about that too, like I think the survey group in some sense will do, hopefully as soon as we get CCI and get that sorted, like I think our work might be opposite. It'll sort of ramp down once we get our questions done and have a clearer sense of what the consultant group is going to do for us.
Okay.
I think that that's a great idea with the rotating, but I would definitely recommend that we keep the groups much smaller then, just to make sure that we're complying with the Brown Act. Because my understanding of the Brown Act, and maybe this would be good to have John on, or maybe Sam, or someone who wants to do it, but like there's people that are in multiple working groups. And if you're in multiple working groups and one is 4 and one is 3, my understanding is that constitutes a chain. Maybe my understanding is incorrect in my understanding of the Brown Act. Sam, do you have?
Yeah, so there could be a nexus between, you know, 4 on one group and 3 in the other that potentially could create that, you know, chain or that serial meeting. And so that is, you know, one area that you need to kind of be aware of so that you can work to avoid And if they're two separate things, then that's fine. But if there's going to be some overlap where there is some discussion, you just got to, I prefer that you err on the side of caution.
So let me just clarify that. So we'll keep using, sorry, Lizzie, I'm going to keep using you as an example. So if Lizzie wanted to do both working groups, be part of the drafting and part of the survey, she should do like commit to the survey group for like the next two, and then at the next meeting say, okay, now I'm switching, so that she's not meeting with two different groups during the same time period?
Only if it's the same subject matter.
Yeah.
They're different purposes, the groups.
Oh, okay. So the danger is not like if she's in two working groups, she might share something and then it would become a chain?
Correct.
Well, that's the danger, is if she shares something from the survey group in the drafting group, then you are potentially violating the Brown Act. But what they would have to commit to if they were going to do it, and what Sam's saying is we should try to avoid it when possible to be safe, is you would have to commit to not bringing up any subject matter that you're discussing with the other group. But it makes sense for us to try to keep these groups in threes so that it's less than 7 between the two drafting groups and hopefully any future work group. Sam, is that correct? Does that sound about correct?
That's correct. And I think John would agree with that assessment as well.
And so, and I'm sorry to belabor the point, but I think that if the people on the current drafting committee, because we're talking about like the relationships between the boards, like that would be nearly impossible to do. So maybe if you're on the board drafting committee, probably should not be on the auditor monitor drafting committee.
Correct.
Right. There'd be too much overlap.
So again, like there's 4 of us here that are precluded. There's other people on other working groups. So if you want to jump from this drafting working group to the other, I guess now would be the time to do that. Or if you want to sign up for the other writing group.
So I'll sign up for that writing group, and then Gabe, if there's somebody who is not here today that really wants to, I'm willing to step off and just focus on the survey group.
Perfect. I'll make a note of that. Thank you, Lizzie. Is there anyone else who is not a part of the review board drafting group that would like to take a crack at auditor monitor for the next 2 weeks? I'd be more than happy to join you, Lizzie.
I'm feeling like that kid.
I want to join, I just can't.
Well,
Yes.
you can actually. You can just leave this working group and go to that one.
I mean, if we need more people, I'm also happy to do that, because I think on our other one, how many do we have? 4 on the other drafting?
We have 5. We have 5 total on the other working group. And Anna, if she's still here, is part of that group as well, and Demo.
So I think we could, if it's okay, if we cut that one down, and then maybe whoever leaves that group can go to this one, which I'm happy to do that, if that works.
Okay.
So Lizzie, Gabe, and Serafina. And I'll be there too.
Thank you, Cami.
Perfect. Louis, do you have any interest in joining the auditor monitor writing group? Yeah, I know that. So if that's the case, I might drop off. Unless you all really want my company, and I can definitely
drop off. Are you on another? I'm only on one other subcommittee. So if you're on 2, then you can drop off. Yeah.
I'm on the outreach and education group. and that one will be ramping up soon. So,
Okay, so if there's 3, then I can go ahead and drop off.
are you sure? No, I think you should stay on and I'll drop off.
You're one of the 3, I think, is what Gabe said.
Well, Serafina, Louis, Gabe,
you.
and myself. Yeah, so that's 4.
Gabe was.
And then
saying
Gabe, okay. All
I
right,
think-
Rosie, go it.
We'll get there at this late hour. All right. I think that is good. Sam, is there any public comment for this item?
Give me 1 second. If there's anyone from the public that would like to speak on item 7, discussion on auditor and monitor authority and procedures, please raise your hand. And if you'd like to entertain a motion for the makeup of this working group and a name, I'd be happy to take that role.
Yeah, and I did want to just say this. John said we have an answer about the rotating groups. John said the rotating groups should be fine as long as they don't communicate about it when they pass it on to the incoming members. So when we do rotate, we can't communicate with them about what was going on in the discussions that happened before. So, all right. So do we have a motion to approve the work group, the drafting work group of Lizzie, Serafina, and Lewis?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Seconded.
And we have a motion from Christian, a second from Rachel. Any discussion? I don't think so. So we can move on to a roll call vote, Sam.
Sure. There's been a motion by Commissioner Alonso, seconded by Commissioner Rachel Johnson to create a auditor and monitor work group made up of Commissioner Rodriguez, Commissioner Reynaud, and Commissioner Chavez. Let me take a roll call vote. Commissioner Adam Malikon, Commissioner Alonso,
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson, Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Gorman, Commissioner Rodriguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Sander. Don't see him. Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Vice Chair Zepeda, and Commissioner Reynaud. Commissioner Reynaud, can you indicate with a thumbs up or a thumbs up? So he has indicated there is a thumbs up for that motion. Motion passes.
Thank you, Sam. I can't wait for Zoom. All right. So with that, Cammie, did you have anything before we close out this item? Cool.
Nothing. Yeah.
We'll close out this item. We'll move on to the next item, future business. It's going to be brief. I think it's mostly going to be work group updates, and we're going to go over the drafts of the that the work groups are going to come to us with on the review board, auditor monitor, and then hopefully finish out the discussion on auditor monitor with Cammie. All right. Any public comment on this item, Sam?
If there's anybody that wishes to speak on the future business portion of this agenda, please raise your hand. There are no hands raised.
All right. So with that, we will close out this item. Thank you all for sticking with us for a long meeting. I really appreciate you.
So since John Doimus is watching, we'll give him a big wave.
John,
John,
feel
take
better,
care, everybody. Take care, everybody. Good night.
everyone.
Good job, everyone.
Everyone. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.